Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about the clavicle bone, our collarbone, and then our shoulder blade, the scapula. First talk about the clavicle. Clavicle is a pretty straightforward, pretty simple bone to know. It's kind of got an S shape to it, a very slight S shape anyway, and it has two ends. You've got the acromial end and then the sternal end. You can see if you look at the bottom of the sternal end, or this kind of the end of the sternal end, I should say, you can kind of see it kind of has this flat part, and then if you look at it from the side, it's kind of more rounded. That's where we attach the clavicle to the sternum to form what we call the sternoclavicular joint. The acromial end is actually going to attach to this structure of the scapula to form the acromioclavicular joint, because we call this the acromion process. This is the clavicle acromioclavicular joint, one of the kind of lesser joints of the shoulder. One thing that the book actually talks about is the fact that the acromial end can kind of be used kind of like a spoon would. So that's kind of the way to tell the difference between the acromial end and the sternal end. Now the scapula is a little more complicated. Right here we're looking at the back or posterior side of the scapula. This would be the front. Easiest way to tell the difference is the front's going to be smooth all the way around. You can see that kind of triangular shape pretty easily, whereas on the back side you're going to have this big structure kind of in the way. And this big structure is called the spine, and that's what you can actually palpate if you feel on the back of kind of your shoulder. The spine is important because it kind of is useful for kind of determining some different parts of the scapula. Above the spine we have this kind of depression called the supraspinous fossa, and then below it we have the infraspinous fossa. So infra for inferior, supra for superior. Now if you're looking right up here in this supraspinous fossa, you might notice this little notch. We call that the suprascapular notch. Okay. Supra, once again, superior, scapular for scapula. Okay. Now, if you follow the spine and you start to turn, and this would be looking at the outside of the arm, you'll notice that the spine actually starts to kind of point forward towards the anterior side of the scapula. And you can really see that like this. It is now called the acromion or acromion process. And like I was saying just a little bit ago, it's what attaches to the clavicle. Now you'll also see another kind of hook-like structure. This hook-like structure is called the coracoid process. It's an important site for attachment of the tendons, for example, from our bicep muscle. And then you'll kind of see this little depression here. This little depression is called the glenoid fossa or glenoid cavity. It's very important because that will accommodate the rounded head of the humerus to form the major shoulder joint, what we call a glenohumeral joint. Gleno for glenoid, humeral for humerus. Now, if you're wondering if this is a left or right, kind of easiest thing to do is figure out which is anterior, which is posterior, and then you'll always want to know and pay attention to the direction that the glenoid fossa is pointing. It's always going to point lateral, and this side of our border is always going to be pointed medial towards where the spinal column, or there, kind of where I'm wiggling my pinky. So that would obviously make this a left scapula. And so I think that covers everything on the scapula and on our clavicle.